I didn't say a word when they handed me that eviction notice. I simply slid the 1923 water rights deed across the table and watched the realization dawn on their faces. 35 McMansions had just become lakefront property. The Willowbrook Estates HOA thought they could snatch my grandfather's farm while I was serving overseas in Afghanistan. These pompous suburban overlords built their polished paradise on stolen soil, complete with tennis-clad Karens patrolling in golf carts. What they didn't count on? I'm an Army Corps engineer. That humble little earth dam on our land had been waiting 45 years for someone arrogant enough to build downstream. Their entitlement was impressive, right up until the spillway gates opened and their luxury homes got a crash course in gravity and water law. It was going to be glorious. So tell me, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below because you're about to witness the most satisfying HOA downfall you've ever seen. Let me introduce myself. Jake Morrison, 34 years old. I serve with the Army Corps of Engineers, and I'm the third-generation owner of 47 acres of prime Texas land, just outside Austin. My grandfather, everyone called him Pops, bought this land in 1955, back when Austin was still a sleepy college town and barbecue joints outnumbered tech startups 1,000 to 1. Pops was a steward of both the land and its people. In 1978, he built a small earthen dam on our property. Nothing flashy, just solid engineering meant to collect rainwater for cattle and help neighbors downstream during droughts. The Army Corps even helped him with the design. Pops used to say that one day those back 40 acres would be worth something, but until then, it was just rolling hills, perfect for cattle grazing and teaching me how to hunt. Then came my 2 tours in Afghanistan, where I focused on water management and infrastructure. Turns out designing water systems in a war zone teaches you how priceless clean water is and how fiercely people will fight over it. During my second tour, Pops passed away. The land was placed in a trust, managed by my well-meaning but overwhelmed sister Sarah. She lives in California and knows about as much about Texas land law as I do about surfing. Sarah hired a local outfit called Loner Land Services to manage the taxes and maintenance. The property taxes were paid automatically. But here's the kicker. She never actually looked at the tax assessments. That oversight was all it took. Enter our antagonist, Margaret Maggie Thornwell, 52, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. She's the kind of woman who drives a white BMW X7 and treats tennis skirts like executive wear. Maggie has perfected that southern brand of passive-aggressive charm where every insult comes gift-wrapped in a smile. She's married to City Councilman Rick Thornwell, which pretty much explains how she pulls strings like a puppet master. She's infamous for her neighborhood beautification initiatives, which is code for booting out anyone who doesn't fit her plastic vision of Stepford suburbia. The smell of her overpriced perfume barely covers the cigarette smoke and entitlement that follow her like a shadow. When I finally came home from deployment in August 2023, I was ready to settle back into Pops' land. I drove down that old gravel road past the oak tree where I'd carved my initials as a kid, expecting peace. Instead, I saw construction crews, cement mixers, and survey stakes peppered across my back 40 like an invading army. The gravel crunched under my boots differently that day, angrier. I tasted the dust and my own fury as I approached the construction foreman. "Sorry, buddy," he said, not even trying to look sorry. "We got permits. This land belongs to Willowbrook Estates now. I called the cops. Officer Martinez arrived and explained, clearly uncomfortable, that the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while I was overseas. If land sits unused for long enough and someone else improves it, they can claim it under an old legal loophole. It was meant to prevent land from going to waste, but developers like Maggie use it to steal with a smile." Then she rolled up in her little golf cart, looking like a suburban general. Her voice oozed fake concern. "Your family abandoned this land, honey," she said, all sweet and poisonous. "We're just putting it to good use, for the community." But here's what really lit a fire in me. Maggie's construction crews had diverted the small creek that fed Pop's dam. Every single day, I watched the water level drop, draining away 45 years of careful water management that had served our neighbors through droughts, floods, and everything in between. As I stood by the edge of that shrinking reservoir, Maggie's parting words echoed in my mind. "You should have stayed closer to home, soldier boy." That's when I realized this wasn't just about land. This was war. I hired the first attorney I could find. Huge mistake. He quoted me $85,000 just to challenge the zoning change. That's when I discovered that while I was deployed, Maggie's husband Rick had rammed through an emergency zoning modification. My family's land had been reclassified from agricultural pre-validation to residential development faster than you could say conflict of interest. But that's where my Army Corps training paid off. While that overpriced lawyer pushed papers and racked up billable hours, I started digging through county records like I was back in Afghanistan, looking for IEDs. And just like in the field, the danger was hidden in the details. I found Pops's original 1978 dam construction permits, and they were gold. Turns out, Pops didn't just build that dam by himself. He worked directly with the Army Corps of Engineers, focusing on flood control and watershed management. That gave it federal jurisdiction, and that meant no local HOA could override it. Period. The taste of adrenaline hit my tongue when I realized what I'd stumbled across. This wasn't a zoning dispute anymore. It was a federal case, but it gets better. While photocopying permits at the courthouse, I uncovered a 1923 water rights deed buried in old files. Turns out my great-grandfather had purchased senior water rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed. These rights were older than the city, older than the county's water system, older than every last one of those McMansions sitting on what used to be my land. They weren't just stealing my land, they were stealing my water. Meanwhile, Maggie was playing the victim. She called an emergency HOA meeting to raise alarms about dam safety, complete with a local news crew she'd clearly tipped off. I watched her on TV, standing on her picture-perfect lawn, dabbing fake tears. "We're just concerned about our children's safety," she sniffled. "That dam looks ready to burst, and we have families living right downstream." Thing is, local news loves drama, but they rarely do deep research. If they had, they'd have found my dam had passed its last federal inspection with flying colors. But Maggie wasn't finished. She took her smear campaign to the Nextdoor app, that digital cesspool where suburban tyrants go to flex their HOA power. Her post warned about aggressive property disputes and unstable individuals in the area. She didn't name me, but she didn't need to. In a small community like that, everyone knew who she meant. The smell of diesel and cedar pollen filled the August air as I stood on my front porch every evening, watching construction crews push double shifts. They were racing to finish the development before I could file a legal injunction. Every night I counted new concrete foundations. Every night the water dropped another inch. That's when I called Tony Riggs, an old Army buddy who now works in EPA enforcement. 20 minutes on the phone with him taught me more about environmental law than that attorney did in 3 hours. "Jake," Tony said, "if they're diverting a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation. And if your dam's under federal jurisdiction..." He didn't even need to finish the sentence, so I got to work. Documenting everything. I set up trail cams, took time-stamped photos of the diversions, and collected flow measurements at 3 points along the creek. My sister Sarah called from California, pleading with me to just take the settlement money and move on. But this wasn't about money anymore. This was about the crunch of boots on gravel that didn't belong there. About Maggie's high heels echoing through zoning hearings that never should have happened. About the taste of burnt courthouse coffee as I uncovered just how far their corruption had gone. But most of all, it was about the dam. Pops built it to help people during dry spells. For 45 years, it sustained the land and our neighbors. Now Maggie's people were draining it to turn it into a decorative pond for the rich. Here's what most people don't know about Texas water law. Water rights are older than oil rights, older than mineral rights, and much harder to steal if you know how to fight. As another cement truck rumbled past my kitchen window, I realized something big. This battle wouldn't be won in a courtroom. It would be won with engineering. Maggie escalated things again. She organized what she called a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 HOA board members in matching polos started camping out at my gate like it was a suburban checkpoint. They photographed every visitor, recorded license plates, and even filed sheriff's reports about suspicious activity. It was textbook harassment. I started getting noise complaints for playing the radio while working the land. I got citations for my farmhouse, which had stood strong since 1962. They even filed bogus environmental hazard reports about my septic system, despite it passing inspection just 6 months ago. Then came the final insult. Rick, Maggie's city councilman husband, used his position to order a wellness check through veteran services. I was labeled a troubled vet, possibly struggling with readjustment. The social worker who showed up was polite, even apologetic, but she still checked every box on her clipboard while Maggie watched from her golf cart. Smug and satisfied like she was inspecting a barracks, that's when the bureaucratic blitzkrieg hit. Building inspector, fire marshal, health department, animal control. All in one day, like a regulatory SWAT team. Each found minor violations that required immediate correction. The building inspector Rick's drinking buddy claimed, "My front porch needed $8,000 in foundation work." I recognized the squeeze play immediately. It's the same tactic we saw used in war zones: bury the locals in bureaucracy until they're too overwhelmed to fight back. But I'd seen it before and I knew how to respond. While they buried me in paperwork, I started making calls. Tony Riggs at the EPA was very interested to learn that Maggie's HOA had never filed a wetlands assessment before redirecting Willow Creek. Here's something they didn't teach Maggie in her HOA rulebook. Any development that redirects a natural waterway requires federal environmental clearance, even on private land. And the penalties? They start at $50,000 a day. Every morning, the smell of curing concrete baking in the Texas heat reminded me that time was running out. But all my late nights in the records office were finally paying off in ways Maggie never saw coming. I found out the entire development was built in what the Army Corps classified as a 100-year floodplain. Insurance companies had initially refused coverage until the HOA submitted a flood mitigation plan. Their solution? Permanently divert Willow Creek away from their luxury homes and let it flood my land instead. Here's your next knowledge nugget. Insurance fraud in development projects can lead to criminal charges, not just civil penalties. When developers lie about flood risk to secure coverage, that's federal mail fraud. And Maggie? This wasn't her first rodeo. I uncovered records from her previous HOA in Houston, fined $2.3 million by the EPA for the exact same creek diversion scheme. She skipped town just ahead of federal prosecutors and set up shop in Austin, hunting for fresh victims. Meanwhile, she started pushing a new smear campaign. She spread rumors about my mental health and alleged violent behavior. She hired a private investigator to dig into my military record, and even organized a petition demanding the city condemn my property as a public hazard. "We have children playing in these neighborhoods," she told the local paper. "We can't have unstable individuals threatening our safety." But while Maggie played the martyr, I built alliances. Through online forums, I found other victims of her tactics. Turns out, over the last 3 years, her HOA had absorbed 6 smaller properties using the same method: pressure, harassment, zoning trickery, and always with Rick's construction company standing to benefit. I partnered with Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor whose once thriving garden had withered since they diverted the creek. I met Miguel Santos, whose family farm had been rezoned out of existence by Rick just 2 years earlier. These weren't isolated incidents. This was a coordinated land grab. The low rumble of heavy machinery through my farmhouse floorboards became a daily reminder of what I was fighting for. Every morning, concrete trucks passed by my kitchen window. Every evening, I documented the water theft slowly killing Pop's Dam. I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing. I installed flow meters at the dam's outlet and at the diversion points, tracking every drop of stolen water. My calculations showed 1,200 gallons per day, valued at $47,000 a year in agricultural water rights. The gritty feel of creek bed sediment slipping between my fingers told the story better than any lawyer could. This wasn't just theft, it was massive environmental destruction. Then came the certified letter. The city was planning to seize my land through eminent domain for public safety. The hearing? Scheduled for just 2 weeks out. Maggie's quote in the paper made her intent crystal clear. Sometimes you have to protect the community from itself. That night, storm clouds gathered outside my bedroom window, and for the first time I realized those weren't just rain clouds. They were opportunity. Maggie had gone nuclear. Rick fast-tracked the eminent domain hearing, and the HOA offered me $180,000 for a property valued at $890,000. The message was clear. Take the lowball offer or lose it all. The local newspaper ran a smear piece headlined, "Troubled Veteran Blocks Community Progress." They used a photo that made my farmhouse look like a drug den and made me look like I hadn't slept in days. But Maggie's masterstroke? A photo op. 20 suburban moms and their kids lined up near my property line, looking terrified, while a professional photographer captured the scene. In the background, my farmhouse loomed, ominous by design. Her Facebook post went viral. Or protect our kids. Our children deserve safe neighborhoods, she told Channel 7, not whatever issues he brought back from war. Funny thing is, she was right about one thing. I did bring something back from war. The ability to spot psychological warfare when I see it, and the engineering skills to fight back. Then Tony Riggs called, and everything changed. The EPA had already opened a federal investigation into the Willow Creek diversion based on my complaint. But here's the kicker. Maggie's previous HOA violations in Houston? Those don't disappear. Federal environmental crimes follow individuals even if they skip jurisdictions. While Maggie posed for the cameras, I discovered that her entire financial empire was built on fraud. The HOA's construction loans were backed by inflated property values. And guess what those valuations were based on? Guaranteed water access. If the water rights reverted back to me, their rightful owner, then the development would become financially underwater. Literally and legally. The taste of irony hit like cold steel. They stole my water to inflate their land value, and now that same greed would drown them. I started to see the panic in Maggie's eyes. She offered me $400,000 cash, no paperwork, 48-hour deadline. I refused. So she went behind my back, flew to California to meet with my sister Sarah, spinning some heart-wrenching tale about her troubled veteran brother. That move backfired gloriously. Sarah might not know Texas land law, but she knows me. She called, laughing. Jake, some woman in tennis clothes, showed up at my door talking about my poor, unstable brother. I told her if she ever contacts our family again, I'm calling the FBI. While Maggie was busy making enemies, I was busy making allies. I partnered with Amanda Cross, an environmental lawyer who specialized in pro bono water rights cases. Together, we built a coalition of downstream farmers affected by the Willow Creek diversion. Miguel Santos came forward with documentation, showing his family had used creek water for farming since 1887. Mrs. Chen produced photographs from the 1940s, showing her grandfather's garden, fed by the same creek that was now being siphoned into. Maggie's ornamental ponds. Then the Audubon. Society got involved. They were horrified to learn the diversion had destroyed critical nesting habitats for several protected bird species. And if there's one thing that gets federal attention fast, it's killing endangered wildlife while stealing water. One night during a reconnaissance run, old Army habits die hard, I made a beautiful discovery. Pop's Dam wasn't just an earthen wall. The original 1978 design included an emergency spillway system with hydraulic gates that hadn't been used since 1982. As I tested them under cover of darkness, I heard the hollow echo of water through the underground channels. They still worked. The spillway had been built specifically for this kind of situation, controlled flooding to restore natural water flow. I calculated the numbers. To restore Willow Creek's natural course, I'd need to release 2.8 million gallons. The dam, thanks to recent rains, was holding 3.1 million gallons. The math was perfect, but the timing had to be flawless. I launched my drone and mapped the new homes Maggie's HOA had built. 5 homes sat directly in the historical flood channel. 3 more had basements below the seasonal high water mark. The irony? The developers had installed fake creek beds with decorative concrete and stones. Pretty? Sure. Functional? Not at all. They couldn't handle real water. But my spillway system? Engineered by the Army Corps, built for exactly this purpose. Then Maggie made her most reckless move yet. Her crews began pouring permanent concrete barriers, sealing off the original creek bed. That would render my spillway system useless and permanently destroy the downstream ecosystem. But in doing so, she gave me the legal justification I needed. The weather forecast predicted heavy rains in September. Perfect cover for emergency dam maintenance. At sunset, I stood at the spillway controls, reading Pop's old journal entry about helping neighbors during a drought. The decision crystallized. It was time to open the gates. While combing through courthouse records that week, for the 3rd time, I found a misfiled document that changed everything. The original 1979 agricultural flood management covenant tied to Pop's Dam construction. The language was simple Elegant. Dam operators shall maintain natural seasonal flow patterns to preserve downstream agricultural water rights in perpetuity. This wasn't just permission. It was a legal obligation, one that overrode any HOA agreement or city zoning change. Amanda's investigation uncovered even more explosive evidence. The HOA's insurance applications contained blatant lies. They'd claimed there was no seasonal flooding risk and that the creek diversion had full agency approval. That lie secured them $47 million in coverage. Here's your third knowledge nugget. Lying about environmental risks to secure insurance coverage? That's federal mail fraud, a felony with mandatory prison time. The more we uncovered, the uglier it got. Rick Thornewell wasn't just the developer. He was the primary investor. Every house built on my stolen land put money directly in his pocket, and he'd never recused himself from a single city council vote that benefited the project. Then Tony Riggs called with the EPA's latest findings, and my blood ran cold. The diversion had wiped out the entire population of Guadalupe bass, a protected species that had thrived in Willow Creek for decades. Texas Parks and Wildlife had recorded the fish kill, but the report mysteriously vanished inside Rick's office before it could trigger prosecution. This wasn't just theft anymore. It was ecological destruction and a cover-up. Then Amanda's banking contacts uncovered the smoking gun. The construction loans were backed by fraudulent environmental assessments, which claimed the creek diversion was a temporary construction measure. Banks were told the water would return to its natural path once building was complete. But if my water rights reverted, the development would be in violation of federal lending regulations, and the banks could demand immediate repayment of $12 million in loans. That's when I found Pop's journals, tucked in a forgotten attic box. His 1980 entry broke me. Opened spillway today. Helped the Santos farm and 3 others get through dry spell. That's what neighbors do. That dam was never about profit. It was about service. Pop had built it to help the community survive droughts, protect against floods, and work together like neighbors should. Maggie hadn't just stolen water. She'd stolen 45 years of community trust and cooperation. My engineering models confirmed what I feared. Maggie's diversion was creating an upstream flood hazard. The redirected water during heavy rains would back up into residential areas. The original creek had acted as a natural drainage system. My spillway was the only functional infrastructure that could prevent disaster. The timeline was brutal. September rains were predicted to be the heaviest in 7 years. If I waited for the courts, real flooding could cause damage and loss. But if I acted now, I could control it. Prove the development was a disaster waiting to happen. This wasn't about revenge. This was about engineering, ecology, and legacy. Standing at the spillway, holding Pop's journal, the moment hit me like thunder. This was no longer personal. It was historical duty. Maggie's HOA had decimated the local farming network. Miguel Santos lost his family's century-old farm. Mrs. Chen's ancestral garden had withered. 3 other families were forced to sell generational land to Rick's eminent domain schemes. But federal, environmental investigators were scheduled to arrive next month. If I opened the spillway before they arrived, the floodplain would tell its own story, and best of all, it would be legal. We didn't just plan a water release, we planned an operation. Amanda filed an emergency agricultural water rights restoration motion, arguing that the dam covenant required me to maintain seasonal water flow. We weren't breaking the law, we were upholding it. Here's a crucial knowledge nugget. Agricultural water rights often supersede residential rights, especially when historical documents predate the development.
And ours did, by nearly a century. My technical preparations were pure Army Corps. I drafted a precise spillway operation plan ad hominem.
Start 4-hour gradual release peak flow by tending to enough to demonstrate natural flood patterns, but not enough to cause structural damage. Except to Maggie's illegal barriers. And safety? Safety was everything. I posted warning signs 24 hours in advance and personally notified the volunteer fire department. This wasn't a reckless flood. It was a carefully controlled demonstration of how the water naturally wanted to flow. Amanda reached out to environmental reporters from the Austin American-Statesman and local TV stations. Miguel organized community witnesses for what we called agricultural water restoration. The strategy was simple. Control the narrative before Maggie could spin it into dangerous veteran terrorizes neighborhood. Our intelligence network felt straight out of a spy novel. Mrs. Chen, through the neighborhood gossip circuit, tracked HOA meetings and rumors. Never underestimate little old ladies with time on their bare hands. The local diner waitress, Miguel's cousin, tipped us off about city council's closed-door sessions. My army buddy at Fort Hood provided drone surveillance for legal documentation while I rebuilt the spillway. Controls with modern hydraulics. Amanda waged a financial war. She contacted insurance companies with evidence of fraud. She arranged for state banking regulators to examine construction loan docs. She filed whistleblower complaints detailing Rick's conflicts of interest. The beauty was in the timing. Weather. Service confirmed heavy rains in 72 hours. Amanda scheduled EPA inspectors to arrive in 36. Miguel brought in the agricultural extension agent to document the downstream benefits. A perfect storm, weather, federal oversight, community support, all converging at just the right moment, and I knew Maggie. When cornered, she escalated, so we prepared. Amanda drafted preemptive legal responses to every tactic we expected: restraining orders, emergency injunctions, media smears. I gathered comprehensive evidence, photo documentation, video testimonies from affected neighbors, historical creek maps, and seasonal flood records. Amanda submitted it all to federal court, ensuring legal protection. Safety protocols were rock solid. Coordinated with the volunteer fire department. Notified all downstream residents. Posted notices in English and Spanish, even drafted an evacuation plan we wouldn't need, just to demonstrate responsibility. Meanwhile, Amanda opened a new front: economic warfare. She tipped off state banking regulators about construction loan irregularities, contacted the Texas Attorney General about the insurance fraud, filed a civil RICO lawsuit, alleging a long-running pattern of racketeering. Here's a knowledge nugget. Coordinated regulatory pressure moves faster than individual lawsuits. When multiple agencies investigate at once, defendants can't fight on all fronts. As the sun set, the smell of WD-40 and machine oil filled the air while I serviced the dam controls one last time. Everything worked. Every valve, every gate. Pop had built this system to last. I stocked the farmhouse with supplies, knowing Maggie wouldn't go down without a dirty trick. Amanda filed protective court orders to prevent interference with lawful dam operations. We established secure, encrypted comms using old military radios, just in case. Standing at the controls during that final equipment check, with storm clouds building in the distance and federal investigators inbound, everything felt aligned. Heavy rains in 48 hours, EPA inspection in 36. Maggie's TV appearance in 24. No, doubt she'd use it to attack my character. Dawn tomorrow would bring justice, and 45 years of stolen water would finally return home. Then Maggie made her move. She hired private security to patrol my property line, not just rent-a-cops. These were tactical vest-wearing wannabes, the kind who think HOA disputes are urban warfare. My trail cams caught them trying to sabotage the spillway at Tupacor. One genius was filmed jamming concrete mix into the hydraulic lines while his buddy played lookout. What they didn't know? Tony Riggs had already tipped off the sheriff's department. Deputy Rodriguez was waiting in the shadows. The arrest was perfect. Mr. Tactical Vest tried the protecting community infrastructure excuse. But it's hard to explain away a bag of quickset concrete at 2 a.m. under a trail cam. Maggie's media blitz was just as desperate. She appeared on the Austin Morning Show, trembling and tearful in her best concerned mom outfit. Veterans need mental health support. Not weapons, she told the host, dabbing her eyes. This man learned to weaponize water in Afghanistan. Now he's threatening to wash away children's homes. Rick chimed in as a city engineer, warning about catastrophic dam failure, conveniently omitting the fact that my dam had passed every safety inspection for 45 years. While they staged their victim routine on live TV, my surveillance network was working overtime. Every trespass, every sabotage attempt, every illegal act, all documented and time-stamped. Then Tony dropped another bomb. Federal investigators had been wiretapping Rick's office phone. The EPA was already building a corruption case. Next came the legal ambush. Rick fast-tracked a 6 a.m. restraining order hearing. hoping to blindside us. Judge Henry Walsh, Rick's golfing buddy and recipient of $15,000 in campaign donations from the construction company, agreed to hear it. Amanda immediately filed for recusal, but we knew the fix was in. If they couldn't stop the spillway with law, they'd stop it with a corrupt judge. Maggie then organized a neighborhood safety patrol, 20 HOA residents, armed with folding chairs, signs, and coolers, set up shop around my property. They live-streamed everything, framing it as environmental terrorism and protect our kids. The optics? Perfect. For her. Suburban families versus dangerous veteran with a dam. But Miguel Santos wasn't done. He brought 30 farmers and families, waving signs about water rights and land justice. Mrs. Chen led a counter-demonstration featuring historical photographs of the creek in its natural state. Amanda brought in reps from the Audubon Society and Sierra Club, two competing narratives, colliding in real time. Veteran attacks families, versus community restores stolen water. Then the sabotage escalated. My cameras caught someone pouring more concrete into the spillway channel, this time in a way that could have caused real flooding danger if the gates opened. This wasn't just vandalism, this was attempted murder disguised as civic activism. I worked through the night, jackhammer in hand, clearing out the blockage while documenting every chunk of concrete as evidence. The metallic taste of exhaustion and rage filled my mouth. That night, Rick used his city council emergency powers to declare my property an imminent public hazard, authorizing the fire department to secure the dam. But Fire Chief Martinez, one of the few honest officials left, pulled me aside. Jake, you've got maybe 6 hours before they force my hand, he said. Make it count. And then, the breakthrough. Amanda's filings had triggered a state-level insurance investigation. The Texas Insurance Commission froze all HOA development insurance. Policies, no insurance, no construction, work. Stopped, immediately, Maggie, and Rick's wallets were finally bleeding. Then Tony advanced. The EPA inspection by 24 hours, citing credible sabotage reports. Federal agents were now en route, ETA 8 a.m. If the spillway opened while they were there, it would be federal evidence, proof that the creek restoration was both necessary and legal. Maggie's final gambit was the cruelest. She contacted Veterans Mental Health Services, falsely claiming I had made suicidal threats and needed an involuntary psychiatric hold. The VA social worker arrived at my farmhouse at 5:30 a.m., just as I was preparing for the spillway operation. So I had to convince her I was mentally competent while simultaneously preparing to flood a subdivision. Not exactly a normal Tuesday morning. Then Sarah called from California, her voice shaking. I can't lose my brother, too. Please, Jake, this isn't what Pops would want. For a second, I almost cracked. But then I opened Pops' old journal and read his final entry, the one about standing up to bullies even when you're outnumbered. My resolve hardened like concrete. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek. At 7:02 a.m., as the morning sun painted the sky, orange and federal agents stood by with clipboards and cameras. I opened the spillway gates to 25% capacity. The sound wasn't violent or destructive. It was the gentle whisper of water returning home. For the first time in 18 months, Willow Creek began flowing in its original bed, exactly where nature intended. Miguel Santos knelt beside the restored creek, cupping the clear water in his hands, tears running down his face. This is the water that fed my grandfather's farm for 60 years, he whispered. Predictably, Maggie's reaction was loud and chaotic. She screamed at the federal agents to arrest the terrorist, her composed suburban mom persona cracking like cheap paint. EPA agent Sarah Kim calmly replied, "Ma'am, this gentleman has the legal right to operate his agricultural flood control system." But Maggie wasn't giving up. She live-streamed on Facebook, voice rising to hysteria, claiming I was flooding children's homes, that this was what happens when unstable veterans are allowed access to heavy equipment, except no homes were flooded. The water flowed exactly where it belonged, along the natural creek bed that her development had illegally blocked. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the spillway operation live. The Austin American-Statesman reporter was interviewing downstream farmers celebrating restored water access when Maggie tried to hijack the interview. "This veteran is using military training to attack civilians," she shrieked. The reporter blinked and asked, "Ma'am, the water is flowing in the original creek bed." How exactly is this an attack? You could hear her entire narrative collapsing in real time. Meanwhile, Rick was frantically calling Judge Walsh, screaming into his phone about campaign contributions and collapsing property values. "That psycho is destroying millions in value," he shouted, forgetting Amanda was recording the call from the courthouse steps. Legal nugget for you. Texas is a one-party consent state, which means Amanda only needed her own permission to make that recording. EPA agent Kim confirmed the water flow matched historical seasonal patterns exactly. Tony Riggs, our documentarian and federal observer, said it best. This is how the creek flowed before the 2022 diversion. Federal law prioritizes natural water flow over developer convenience, and we were proving that in real time. Mrs. Chen's garden irrigation system filled for the first time in a year and a half. 3 downstream farms reported water returning to their stock ponds. The local diner owner brought coffee and homemade kolaches, saying, "My daddy farmed here. This is how it should be." Even some of Maggie's supporters began to drift away once they realized there was no actual flooding. It's hard to stay outraged when the so-called disaster you're protesting is just clean water flowing peacefully where it's supposed to. The insurance collapse came fast. A cease and desist order from state investigators stopped all work on the HOA development. Maggie discovered her homeowner's insurance might be voided due to fraudulent water access claims. Rick, true to form, tried one last move. Maggie screamed at him to send trucks to block the spillway. He complied, sending 3 concrete trucks to accidentally dump their loads across the creek bed. Federal agents immediately arrested all 3 drivers. Interfering with a federal environmental investigation is a felony. The engineering validation was flawless. Water flow stabilized at optimal agricultural and environmental levels, with 0 overflow. The creek stayed entirely within its natural banks, just as my Army Corps calculations had predicted. Councilman Martinez arrived at the site, demanded Rick's immediate resignation, and declared our city had become a laughingstock due to corruption. Federal investigators expanded their probe to include RICO charges for systematic land fraud. Tony later told me, "This is the smoking gun we needed." And the most poetic moment came when Maggie, realizing her $2.3 million investment was now worthless, screamed at me across the water, "You've destroyed everything." 35 families! I didn't flinch. Loud enough for every mic to catch, I replied, "No, ma'am. I restored everything. Your families can buy water rights legally, just like everyone else has to." As Maggie stormed off muttering about federal lawsuits that would never materialize, Miguel's family arrived with homemade tamales and cold beer. Mrs. Chen brought a traditional Chinese tea ceremony to bless the restored creek. In that moment, I understood this had never been about revenge. It was about community. The kind Pops had built, one drought at a time, one act of generosity at a time. Environmental groups praised the spillway as a model for ecosystem restoration. The media narrative shifted completely. The unstable veteran floods suburb headline became "Community reclaims stolen water." Sometimes, the truth flows as naturally as water finding its way home. Judge Walsh's courtroom at 2 p.m. was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Media crews, farmers, angry HOA residents, and federal agents crowded every inch of the gallery. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a reckoning. Maggie arrived dressed like a grieving widow, flanked by high-powered attorneys and experts, including a psychiatrist who had never met me, but was happy to diagnose combat revenge fantasies based on news clippings. "This disturbed veteran," her attorney announced, "is using military engineering knowledge to terrorize innocent families. He's turned water into a weapon of mass destruction." The courtroom buzzed. Then Amanda stood to respond. She presented the 1978 Agricultural Flood Covenant that legally required seasonal overflow. EPA agent Kim took the stand and confirmed my operation had restored natural water flow without damaging property. Historical aerial photos showed that water levels matched 60 years of seasonal patterns. Final legal nugget. Documented water rights always beat recent development claims, especially when you have the federal government backing you. Then came Tony Riggs's testimony. He laid out the HOA's violations of 3 federal environmental laws, systematic insurance fraud, and destruction of protected wildlife habitat. You could see Judge Walsh calculating the risk of political loyalty to Rick versus federal prosecution. Then Amanda called Rick to the stand. Under oath, he admitted to fast-tracking zoning changes while I was deployed and revealed his personal financial stake in the construction company. Amanda played the recorded call, Rick screaming about property values and campaign donors. Rick exploded, screamed about federal setups, and stormed out of the courtroom. But it was too late. His own words sealed it. The real emotional blow came from the community. Miguel described his grandfather's farm dying with the diverted creek. Mrs. Chen quietly showed photos of her withered garden. Fire Chief Martinez confirmed the spillway had 0 safety violations. Downstream farmers testified that water had been fully restored. Then Maggie took the stand for her last dramatic performance. "He came back from war damaged," she sobbed, pointing at me. "He's waging psychological warfare on children. He's a danger." When Amanda called me to testify, the room fell silent. I stood wearing Pop's old cowboy hat and said, "Your Honor, I didn't flood anyone. I restored a creek stolen from my family and this community for 45 years. The final blow came when Amanda revealed Maggie's Houston HOA had already paid $2.3 million in EPA fines for an identical creek diversion. The federal prosecutor stood and announced an investigation into interstate water fraud conspiracy. Judge Walsh had no choice. He denied all restraining orders, declared my spillway operation fully legal and beneficial, and ordered the HOA to cease all interference. His final words to Rick were clear. "This court will not obstruct lawful federal environmental enforcement." As agents arrested Rick and investigators served more warrants, Maggie bolted from the courthouse with reporters chasing her. She refused all comment and disappeared in her BMW, likely calling moving companies on the way out of town. 6 months later, justice flowed like the restored creek. Rick pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy and got 3 years in prison. Maggie filed bankruptcy under $8.7 million in civil penalties. The construction company paid $12 million in EPA fines and was banned from federal contracts. The HOA dissolved. My property value rebounded to $1.2 million after being designated part of a protected environmental watershed. I used the $340,000 insurance fraud settlement to buy Miguel's family farm at tax auction and returned it to him debt-free. Community transformation was the real win. The restored creek attracted kayakers, birdwatchers, and hikers. Mrs. Chen's garden became a teaching site for sustainable agriculture. Local farms reported their best crop yields in a decade. The diner became the unofficial headquarters for the Willow Creek Restoration Association. The environmental impact was extraordinary. Guadalupe bass populations returned to pre-diversion levels. 12 bird species reappeared within 4 months. Texas Parks and Wildlife designated the creek as a critical wildlife corridor. My spillway design became a case study in the Army Corps training manual. And me? I found a piece I hadn't known I was missing. I renovated Pops's farmhouse using sustainable materials. Sarah moved back to help run our growing agritourism business. Amanda and I, well, let's just say fighting corruption side by side builds a strong bond. Our story spread across Texas. Environmental groups used our model to challenge illegal diversions. Federal agencies updated their enforcement guidelines. I became an unofficial consultant for communities fighting HOA tyranny. We created the Pops Morrison Environmental Scholarship for rural students like Miguel's daughter, Maria, now studying environmental engineering at UT Austin to protect watersheds like her grandfather's. Each year, we host the Creek Days Festival to fund water rights legal defense. My favorite part? Watching kids swim in a creek that's free because a community stood up. Every Sunday, I visit Pops's grave and bring a mason jar of creek water, just like he used to do. "Thanks, Pops," I tell him. The creek's singing again, just like you said it would. And it always will, because now it's protected forever by the Willow Creek Conservation Trust. No one will ever steal this water again. Here's the twist. Maggie's Houston HOA faced federal RICO prosecution thanks to our case. And 147 families across 3 states filed similar lawsuits. What started as one veteran's stand became a national movement. From my porch, watching the water flow exactly where it belongs, I'm reminded that some fights are worth everything you've got. You don't do it alone. You do it with your neighbors, your values, and the quiet power of truth. If you're fighting HOA overreach, environmental abuse, or bureaucratic bullying, don't give up. Document everything. Find allies. Remember, the law is on your side when you're fighting for the land. Drop a comment. Tell me your HOA nightmare. I read every single one. And subscribe if you want more stories about ordinary people fighting back and winning. Next week, I'll tell you about the city that tried to steal my neighbor's solar farm. So she cut power to City Hall during the mayor's wedding. That's a story about a different kind of power. Because just like water, justice finds a way. And when communities fight together, we win! Willow Creek flows free, y'all, and it always will.